Carla with Raised to Walk, and today I'm going to be doing a review on The Abolition of Man by C.S. Lewis. So a lot of people know C.S. Lewis by the Chronicles of Narnia. If you're more of a reader, you may possibly know him by his book, The Screwtape Letters, or maybe even you've read Mere Christianity, which is a theological classic, but not as many people have heard about his book, The Abolition of Man. It's actually included in a lot of lists of the top books of Western civilization. I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but I've noticed that sometimes there are people who will just, it looks like they just took a quote off of Goodreads and then they will put it on a meme, and they'll, but their comment, you can tell that they've never read the book itself. I've seen that with this book a lot. There's a very popular quote in this called, it refers to men without chests. And I guess they think, they just read the title, The Abolition of Man, and they think it has to do with masculinity. That's not what it means. He's talking about humanity, who we are as human beings, not about like some He-Man or something. It's just, so if you see that around in any blog post or on social media, just know that that person probably has never cracked the book open. So this book was written in 1944. It's in the middle of World War II. What prompted the book was Lewis was a literature professor at Oxford, and he was sent a book by a publisher of a grammar book for elementary school. And he read it and he was just appalled, because basically what they were teaching is constructivism, and we have that actually in our schools today, was that you determine what it actually means. What it means is what it means to you, and that is the foundation of relativism. So this whole book is basically, it's really not that long. It's more like a long essay than necessarily a book, written to his fellow academics. So it's a lot meatier than some of his other books. It's a lot more dense. So when you read it, now you may be absolutely brilliant and be able to get difficult concepts the first time and the first read through. For me personally, I had to read through it a couple times to really grasp it, and I took a class at Houston Baptist University where this is part of the assigned reading, and we had discussion on it. So it's something you really have to kind of dig into and sift through to really grasp it. And I've read commentary by other people as well that it's one of those things that you just have to really read several times to be able to get a handle on it. But in a nutshell, he's talking about the dangers of relativism in this book and what the outcomes are when truth, if we actually believe that truth is centered in ourselves. So I'm going to read a couple of, the beginning, he kind of goes off on the writers of the grammar book, which he calls the Green Book. And he has, he's talking about what happens if you think that meaning is centered in yourself, that when you learn something, what you're learning is only how you take it versus how the author meant it. He also talks about that in another book that he has called An Experiment in Criticism. He talks about using versus receiving the text, that we should receive it and understand and think through how the original writer actually meant it to be understood. So in the beginning, he says, from this passage, the schoolboy will learn about literature precisely nothing. What he will learn quickly enough, and perhaps indelibly, is that the belief that all emotions aroused by local association are in themselves contrary to reason and contemptible. He will have no notion that there are two ways of being immune to such an advertisement, that it falls equally flat on those who are above it and those who are below it, on the man of real sensibility and the mere trousered ape who has never been able to conceive the Atlantic as anything more than so many million tons of cold salt water. There are two men to whom we offer in vain a false leading article on patriotism and honor. One is a coward, the other is an honorable and patriotic man. None of this is brought before the schoolboy's mind. On the contrary, he is encouraged to reject the lure of the Western Ocean on the very dangerous ground that in doing so he will prove himself a knowing fellow who can't be bubbled out of his cash. Gaius and Titus, this is his pseudonyms for the real authors of the book, while teaching him nothing about letters, have cut out of his soul long before he is old enough to choose the possibility of having certain experiences which thinkers of more authority than they have held to be generous, fruitful, and humane. So he goes on about this a little bit more, and then he says that this is their day's lesson in English, though of English they have learned nothing. Another little portion of the human heritage has been quietly taken from them before they were old enough to understand. And so that's one of the things about, I talked about this in my my back to school book haul, is that when we read these older books, these classic books, we're seeing that time through the eyes of the person who lived it. And if we only look at it as from our own perspective, then we will never have that understanding. We've basically cut ourselves off from our history. After he goes through the dangers of having this perspective of that truth and meaning is centered in ourselves, he goes into a defense for objective truth. And he puts this label of this objective reality, these objective truths, as the Tao, which is a Chinese term. It says the Chinese also speak of a great thing, the greatest thing, called the Tao. It is a reality beyond predicates, the abyss that was before the Creator himself. It is nature. It is the way, the road. It is the way in which the universe goes on, the way in which things everlastingly emerge, stilly and tranquilly, into space and time. It is also the way which every man should tread in imitation of that cosmic and supercosmic progression, conforming all activities to that great exemplar. And a little bit further on, he writes, it is a doctrine of objective value, the belief that certain attitudes are really true and others really false to the kinds of things the universe is and the kinds of things that we are. The other part that is really well known about this book is, like I mentioned, there's a passage where he talks about men without chess. And he writes, as the king governs by his executive, so reason in man must rule the mere appetites by means of the spirited element. And he's quoting Plato. The head rules the belly through the chest, the seat, as Atlantis tells us, of magnanimity, of emotions organized by trained habit into stable sentiments. The chest, magnanimity, sentiment, which are the indispensable liaison officers between cerebral man and the visceral man. It may even be said that it is by this middle element that man is man, for by his intellect he is mere spirit, and by his appetite mere animal. So the point of that passage is that we aren't just mind and we're not just emotions, that the two have to be in harmony with each other, and that we have to, just because you feel something doesn't necessarily mean that it's something that's a good or a true thing, because we can be very off in our feelings, but we have to have those trained sentiments, and we have to be able to bring those two into alignment. And this is a quote of the Men Without Chess. In this sort of ghastly simplicity, we remove the organ, so he's talking about the heart, and demand the function. We make men without chess and expect of them virtue and enterprise. We laugh at honor and are shocked to find traitors in our midst. We castrate and bid the geldings to be fruitful. And I think this is, in this past month, there's been a lot of turmoil, with the different mass shootings, and we wonder, how do those things happen? But we as a society have become so detached that we don't have care or concern for other people. And so that's just an extreme outcome of a path that many people are on, that many people say the words, but there are a few people that actually actuate those words. So I think it's very important that we have to recognize that our sentiments, what we're putting out there, have an impact. They have meaning. And he progresses through this essay or short book. He goes from, the dangers of relativism and defense for objective truth, how that objective truth impacts us and affects us and how we are to interact with us. And then he moves on into what those outcomes could possibly be, because they were in the beginning of where this technology was coming into play, where certain people could have great power over a few. And this is exactly what he writes. He writes, man's conquest of nature, if the dreams of some scientific planners are realized, means the rule of a few hundreds of men over billions upon billions of men. And a little bit further, the final stage is come when man, by eugenics, by prenatal conditioning, and by an education and propaganda based on a perfectly applied psychology, has obtained full control over himself. Human nature will be the last part of nature to surrender to man. The battle will then be won. We should have taken the thread of life out of the hand of Clotho, and be henceforth free to make our species whatever we wish it to be. The battle will indeed be won, but who precisely will have won it? For the power of man to make himself what he pleases means, as we have seen, the power of some men to make other men what they please. And that's the real danger, and that's the point that we're at. I mean, he wrote this in 1944. What he saw then was something to concern him. I can't even imagine what he would be writing now. And then again, but the man molders of the new age will be armed with the powers of an omnicompetent state and an irresistible scientific technique. We shall at last get a race of conditioners who can really cut out all posterity in the shape they please. So his whole message of the book is really a warning to his academics, his fellow academics, who were going after this pursuit and just basically seeing what they could do. In indirect references, he equates it to the same sort of actions that the Nazis did, which everyone was so horrified by, but they didn't see how their own actions compared. The other way he illustrates this is in his book, That Hideous Strength. So this book is a fictionalized imagination of what he warns against in The Abolition of Man. I'm going to be doing a review on this next week, and I'm also going to be talking about the connections with 1984 on that, so be sure to subscribe and tune into that. But this is a really, again, I just read a few excerpts out of this book. This is a really amazing read, and it gives us a lot to think about, and it really kind of, as we're looking at what's going on in our society today, it really gives us reason to pause for thought. But as I said, this book was something that we read when I was in the apologetics program at HBU. Everyone in our program, whether they were in the cultural program or in the philosophical track, read the book in research and writing. And after I finished that class, I had just finished it, and something happened in our school district, and it was very controversial. And as I was reading about it and learning more about the different dynamics in the reform movement in education, I realized that what I was seeing was actually the Green Book and the Abolition of Man. It was the same thing that C.S. Lewis had been talking about. So I was researching just reading about who the players were and how it was being implemented in our schools. And like I said, it's called constructivism in education, where what kids learn is basically they determine their own truth. Just has become a common phrase about what's your truth. And actually, I didn't realize this until real recently, but the whole language learning in the reading program is actually based on constructivism too, where you create your own meaning for words, which basically what that is doing, that is eliminating even the possibility for communication if we all have different definitions of what words mean. Words have particular meanings. It's not dependent on us, right? So anyway, some friends and I from the apologetics program, the graduates from the program, as well as people who are still going through the program, started a journal in April of 2018. It's a quarterly journal. And in each issue, we focus on a different topic. And we decided that since all of us have read The Abolition of Man, that our first issue was going to be on the abolition of man. My contribution to this was, it's actually the last essay in the issue. It's called The Green Book to the River, Lewis, Relativism, and Constructivism in Education. So when they decided on the topic, I knew all along that I wanted to write about constructivism and the abolition of man and constructivism and its impact on modern education. But the issue that was going on in our school district, it was very contentious, and I wanted to write something that I didn't want to reference it specifically, although I did refer to it in the footnotes. So if you want to see all the drama, you have to get the print version because it's not in the online version, and you can just read the footnotes. That's where the story is. But I knew the types of things that I wanted to say, but I wasn't really sure how to convey it. So I prayed about it. I was like, God, what do I do? And like, how do I illustrate this? And I'll show you what I read. So I pulled out, I had this book, Flannery O'Connor. We read Flannery O'Connor in high school. I'm pretty sure I read some of her stories as an undergraduate, but I haven't read all of her short stories. And so I was pulling all these different resources, thinking, okay, what am I going to use in this essay? And I felt like, the Holy Spirit was directing me to this book, The Complete Stories of Flannery O'Connor. And I just opened it up. It's not even the middle, but I opened it up, and it opened up to the river. This is not... Yeah, I can't even open to it now, but at the time, I opened it up to the river. And I had been having this, when I was thinking about what I wanted to write, I was thinking about how this ideology of constructivism had developed sort of into this flood. It had inundated the educational landscape. And so that was the concept that was in my mind. So when I saw that it was a river, I hadn't read this story before. I thought, okay, well maybe, this kind of ties into that idea of this flood, this water. And so I read through the story, and I said, I don't understand how this relates to this. And I said, you have to help me with this. And so then I read through it again, and then I got it. I got how this story illustrates the point that Lewis is making, that the danger when we think that truth is in ourselves, and when we have all these illustrations, we have all these ideas, and we don't look to see how they connect or even if they integrate with actual reality, or how other people are receiving that information, if we are communicating actual truth, what that danger is. And so I'm not going to tell you the outcome of the story, because if you haven't read it, because it's actually a little bit shocking. This book you can get on Amazon. Most of your libraries will probably have it. If you're interested in reading my essay on the abolition of man, you can actually read it for free if you want. If you go to anunexpectedjournal.com, we have all of our issues, all of our essays and pieces are available online. If you want to have the physical copy to read, you can get it on Amazon. You can also subscribe to the journal and get it that way. But there's a lot of really great essays on the abolition of man in this. I think that if you're a first-time reader of the abolition of man, if you go through some of these pieces, it will really help you see and really get into Lewis's full meaning of his book. Because when I took the class where we read The Abolition of Man. Normally in my classes, we'd have maybe 10 to 15 people, and I knew that if I came across some reading that I didn't quite understand, usually the discussion in the class helped me to understand it. Well, this class, there were more people in the class, but everybody dropped out except for me and one other person. So we didn't have the breadth of discussion in that class that we had, and I didn't feel like I really had as much of an understanding on it, because it's a meaty book to go through. And so I think it's helpful to have the insights to other people about different areas of the book and have a discussion group to discuss this book with. Then read through these essays, and I think that it will really be a blessing to you as far as really getting into and understanding the scope of what Lewis was saying. If you want to have one book that really has the ability to really change mindsets and have a deep impact, this is one book that you should put on your list. So thanks for watching this review. And so if you've read this book, or if there's parts of it that sound interesting to you, just comment below. And